Vietnam, 1966. The war turns a new fierce page. 27-year-old Antonio Araneta, the son of the owner of Philippines' then renowned graphic newspaper, ventured into northern Vietnam to report on the war. Returning from the trip, he would go on to publish the highly influential Vietnam series that changed the views of many Filipinos on the American war in Vietnam. His unexpected brief meeting with President Ho Chi Minh during his interview with then Prime Minister Phạm Văn Đồng would go on to leave a lasting impression on the young reporter. 2 years later, in 1968, Antonio returned to Vietnam, this time with his wife Gemma Cruz Araneta. Gemma had been crowned Miss International at Long Beach, California, becoming the first Asian woman to receive the award. Fearlessly, Gemma braved the mid-war scene in North Vietnam with her husband, interviewing Prime Minister Phạm Văn Đồng a second time, and meeting and conversing with many other leaders and militia members in the country. Gemma compiled the memories of her life-changing trip in a book titled Hanoi Diary, a current coup d'etat among younger generations of Filipino students. Throughout the years, their love for Vietnam has remained unwavering as they try to help the country in any way possible.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Talk Vietnam. Now, during the two resistance wars that Vietnam had against the foreign invaders, Vietnam has had many supporters, wholehearted international friends who have shown support as well as their special love for the country. Among them are two Philippine journalists who has written a number of journals and as well as articles supporting Vietnam during the wartime. The interview they had with the then Vietnamese Prime Minister Phạm Văn Đồng, as well as their unexpected meeting with President Ho Chi Minh, has cemented their love over the years for Vietnam. They have nourished that love and have been able to help Vietnam however they can. And they have traveled all the way from Manila, Philippines this time to be here with us in Talk Vietnam to share their stories. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Gemma Cruz Araneta and Mr. Antonio Araneta.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Araneta, for being here in our show. How are you today?
I'm very well. You can call me Gemma.
Wonderful, Gemma. And how are you, Antonio?
Very well, and please call me Antonio as well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much it's our honor to welcome you to Talk Vietnam, and the fact that you went all the way from Manila to be here, we're very honored. Now,
well, the honor is ours, and it's really a privilege to be able to address the Vietnamese people.
Wonderful. And we'll talk more about your special relationship with Vietnam. Now, how long has it been since the last time you were in Vietnam?
The last time I was here was in May 1968.
1968. And how about for you, Antonio?
The last time was during the first time was 1966.
1966.
And the last time was in 1985 on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the Vietnamese nation.
Yes.
September 2, 1985.
September 2nd, the National Day in 1985, and that was the 40th.
That's correct, the 40th anniversary.
Can you tell us a little bit about kind of the feelings being back here? I mean, your last time here was in 85. How is it like being back now?
Well, I look at the span from 66, when everything was critical. 85, Vietnam already had won its independence. But the feeling that I remember is that 66 was the time to be here to see how the people, under the leadership of President Ho, could bind themselves so well and carry on a struggle which seemed to be difficult. 2 years after, in 1968, I come with Gemma, and I see Prime Minister Phạm Văn Đồng again for the second interview, and I was telling myself, look at the self-confidence in this man. He displays such surprising self-confidence that it's difficult to believe that this country is being bombed every day for the past 2 years. I said, they will win. They will win, no doubt about that. And lo and behold, in a few years, 75, this event happened, as you know.
Yes.
So the rest is history. And that is the history of Vietnam.
Let's talk a little bit about the first trips, the first feelings you've had coming to Vietnam. For you, Antonio, it was in 1968. This was in the middle of the war zone.
66, no?
1966.
Yes.
In the middle of the war zone and in conflict, obviously, with the Americans. How were your feelings going directly into the war zone?
The high point was the last few days, an interview with Prime Minister Pham Van Dong. And in the course of that interview, where we asked many questions, suddenly President Ho Chi Minh comes in, and all stand up. It was an unexpected thing, and we talked to each other very friendly, very casually. And right off the bat, when we were talking, I could feel that a certain attraction in him that I keep telling up to now, and I'm not even Vietnamese. That is a man I could die for. But at any rate, I could feel that. Well, anyway, I made a mistake. I had a questionnaire addressed to the Prime Minister. Since the president was there, we were very familiar with this.
Exactly, you
I
had to
addressed
address
it to
him
the
as
president,
well.
to President Ho Chi Minh, and he very politely said, "Sorry, the interview was with the Prime Minister." So I will have to go. I realized I had made a mistake. Anyway, so off he goes, slowly. Then he stops. He looks back at me and asks me, "By the way, are you married?" I said, "Yes, I have one wife and one daughter of 2 months old."
Yes.
Then, carefully measuring his words, he says, "Send my love to your wife and my kisses to your daughter." And then a few more steps. That was the last time I saw him.
Wow. So
Very
this
touching.
a very unexpected meeting with President Ho Chi Minh in 1966.
Unexpected but very inspiring. That has remained with me. And I think will remain with me till my dying day.
Yes. Did he speak English with you?
Very good English and looked very healthy. In fact, he died 3 years after that. I couldn't expect it because when he came in, he sauntered in very well. And as I described it, he seemed to have, as though he had come from a long swim, very relaxed, very calm, smiling.
Well, I'm very happy that he gave that message, "Send my love to your wife," even if I never met him personally.
Exactly. Antonio, tell us a little bit about going into, this is northern Vietnam, a war zone at the peak of the war in 1966. What were some of the images of the wartime that still stick to mind? It must have been kind of a very, memorable experience.
You wanted me to answer that?
Well, 1966 was the first time, and I did not feel, at that age, you feel very adventurous, and it was an honor, and I only went to the war briefly during the Second World War, and that was a long time ago, having been born in 1939. But there was no fear. Well, maybe I did realize the danger, but it was a great adventure. But the high point really was meeting with the Prime Minister of Pham Van Dong, and the unexpected entry of President Ho Chi Minh, which I will repeat. In the course of a very unofficial meeting with him, I could feel the magnetism of this man, his sincerity. I mean, sincerity maybe was the thing that really went up. And as I said, even if I'm not a Vietnamese, I could feel this is a fellow man whom I could die for. Yes. That's it. And I can understand why the people rallied, and up to now they still feel about him. Every once in a while I meet some Vietnamese and I say, "I met Mr. Ho Chi Minh," and they look around me, really what kind of a man he was. So I feel very privileged by that unexpected encounter.
Yes. Now, Antonio, I know that today, coming here to this talk, you have brought some souvenirs. I mean, you've, throughout your years of being kind of connected to Vietnam, you've kept many souvenirs to kind of show your love for the country. So can you share with us some of the souvenirs you've brought here?
Well, these were souvenirs given to me by Godien and the members of the foreign journalists, Vietnam journalists. So I still keep, because I was asked to show what I keep about Vietnam, and there you are. That's very familiar. It's still there after so many thousands of years. It still be there.
Yeah, restored lake, restored sword lake.
Yes,
Yes.
the tortoise tower at the Sword Lake.
And of course, there are all these rings, which some of which had to do with, they were giving, I've given away many. They came from parts of airplanes, American airplanes which were shut down, and numbering, many of them. Sometimes the number of planes already shot.
And these were given to you as souvenirs.
Souvenirs of the fighting spirit that they turn everything to their advantage. The people
I mean,
of
you
Vietnam,
don't see these things around
Of course
anymore. I mean,
not, no.
made directly from the metal scraps of the airplanes.
Yes, they also used to make combs. In fact, Nguyen Thi Han gave me a comb made out
A
of
comb
yes,
also
yes,
made out of the
yes.
scraps.
and in fact, I'll give you a ring.
Oh,
I hope you don't
Wow.
take it as an engagement ring. Because
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow. You came back to the Philippines from North Vietnam in 1966. You started to write this series on Vietnam, is that right?
That's correct.
Yes. So now this series basically told the stories about Vietnam and about the war happening in Vietnam from a different side, a different side from all the media that was going on back then. And the series started with the interview that Antonio has just told us about, and that was the interview with the then Prime Minister of Vietnam, Mr. Phạm Văn Đồng. So let's have a look at that.
Returning from the war in Vietnam in 1966, Antonio published the Vietnam series. His first 10 articles depicted Hanoi, Hải Phòng, Thanh Hóa, and Phat Giang. Above all, he conveyed through his reports on the determination and resilience of the Vietnamese people during wartime. The most monumental piece of his series was Antonio's interview with the then Prime Minister of Vietnam, Mr. Phạm Văn Đồng. His unexpected meeting with President Ho Chi Minh during the interview and the message the leader gave him would go on to be imprinted in the mind of the young reporter. Coming back from Vietnam in 1968, Antonio went on to publish a new series of articles detailing all that he had experienced and witnessed. The truth, he writes, is that Vietnam fights for national independence. The Vietnamese fight for a true cause, for the nation, and for that, they are sure to win.
This series of articles, you named one of your articles as Hanoi's message to us. What is that message?
Well, essentially, the policy then that Mr. Pham Van Dong mentioned was, we would like that no Asian countries, Philippines, interfere in Vietnam. To leave us alone and not get involved with being, as he called it, puppets of American imperialist forces. Remember, he always made a distinction between the American people, many of whom supported the war against Vietnam, like President Clinton, who's now very popular. He was against the war in Vietnam. That was his main message. I recall that the most interesting thing was his comment that you will see how we are resolute. We will be able to win this war. Because I did ask him in '66, what if the Americans, that's the most important question I recall, decide, the American imperialists, over the wishes of the American people, decide to use nuclear weapons? How will you cope with that? And his answer was very carefully said. Answered, he said, we are not afraid. If we were not afraid, we would not have waged this war this long. We will always emerge triumphant. It came out. That was the article that came out and splashed in many papers around the world.
And what was the reaction of the Philippines authorities to your series?
Well, there were always two. There were some who, authorities, of course, followed the policy of the president then, who was then supporting the American policy of Johnston. But the people were different. That's why in 2 years, by 1968, the Philippine troops, they called them at that time civic troops, had been withdrawn. That's why I was able to come back 68, feeling a bit happy that I did not have to be cringing in embarrassment that we had been interfering in Tainan.
When I went to Hanoi, I was also prepared for the worst. Instead, I found myself writing a diary about the determination, self-confidence, and victories of the Vietnamese people.
That was the closing to the introduction of Gemma's Hanoi Diary. A deserted and abandoned Hanoi posts a shower of bombs. A resilient Thanh Hoa that would not stand down to bombs nor bullets. A Ham Rong bridge that would stand steadfast. The meeting with Prime Minister Phạm Văn Đồng is a moment Gemma finds most unforgettable. Through conversing with the leader and militia members, she concludes,
The North Vietnamese do not fight with guns alone. North Vietnam fights with every single man, woman, and child who believes that their cause is just. Her most potent weapon is something that the Pentagon computers will never figure out: sheer and almost fanatical determination.
You both came back in 1968, and Antonio mentioned earlier that you both then had this belief that Vietnam would win the war. Is that right?
Yes, because that was really very obvious. Because of the high morale of the people, of the Vietnamese people. When we went up to Thanh Hoa and Phat Diem, there were a lot of bomb craters. Really enormous bomb craters. But what did the Vietnamese people do? They turned them into fish ponds, and then they grew vegetables around the sides of the bomb craters. So they turned this very negative thing into something positive. They were there.
Into daily life.
Yes,
basically.
for daily life. They were feeding the people during the war. So I thought, how can any country, even as mighty as America, win against this type of determination? It's impossible. Besides, they're fighting for their country, so time is on their side. And the Americans are here as invaders, intruders. So with that kind of morale, I really thought, even if they don't have the sophisticated weapons of the United States, I don't think you're going to win against the Vietnamese people.
Yeah. Coming back from your experience, your first experience in Vietnam in 1968, you published a book called Hanoi Diary.
Yes.
You have it right here.
Yes,
Can you
that's
show
right.
us?
Well, as I told you earlier, I really wanted to take down notes of everything that we did and everything that we asked or we said and that everything that our Vietnamese friends told us. So we were fortunate that we were allowed to, or the officials gave us time to interview them, because we interviewed high-ranking officials like a justice of the Supreme Court.
Wow.
And we also interviewed a priest in Phat Diem. And of course, we interviewed a lot of militia leaders to tell us of their experience about the war efforts. Okay. And not only that, the production side of how they're able to support a people's war.
Yes.
So I wanted to note it down.
You were basically going into war, but you came out having very good impressions of the Vietnamese people. Is that right?
Of course, yes, and very inspired.
How would you, if you had to describe the Vietnamese people back then, what could be some of the adjectives to describe them?
I would say that they were very resilient, very patriotic, and very selfless, and they were a united people.
Later on, I understand that you made a decision to live in Mexico for 17 years. Is this anyway related to Vietnam?
Well, not really, because when I came here, it was 1968, and a few years after that, martial law was declared in the Philippines. And I think this book put me in a bit of a problem. When we went to Vietnam, we were, of course, accused by some conservative elements as being communists or spreading communist propaganda. So we were both interrogated by the military authorities. And I was...
the president then, your president then, was, going towards kind of the same views as President
Johnson.
Johnson, basically.
Yes, of course. And then the chief of staff of the president, who was Brigadier General Fidel Ramos, he interviewed me and he said, well, you can continue writing, he said, but you have first to show me your articles. So I said, oh, how can I write like that? And then Mr. Araneta had to go into hiding because they were looking for him. So I thought, I think I better leave this country until this martial law is over. So I went to Mexico because it's very much like the Philippines. And besides, my uncle was then the ambassador there, so I presumed that he would arrange my residence papers, which he did.
Let's talk a little bit more about this trip to Vietnam. In this trip to Vietnam, Gemma and Antonio had the chance to visit the memorial site, relic site dedicated to President Ho Chi Minh. So let's have a look at that.
Before this visit, Gemma shares that she had once heard that President Ho has read her Hanoi diary and that perhaps he would have kept it on a bookshelf right here in this room, which once served as his office. If so, she says, it would be a great honor for her. And this is an alarm bell that would sound a warning when American airplanes were near. When it went off, President Ho Chi Minh and everyone in the compound would run to a foxhole nearby here. The bell was made from scraps of billets. For Antonio, this visit has helped him to understand how he was unexpectedly approached by President Ho Chi Minh when interviewing Prime Minister Pham Van Dong in 1966.
When I see now for the first time, after so many years, the very house that he lived in, that's why when he sauntered into our interview with Prime Minister Pham Van Dong, we did not know he was going to come in. We all stood up, and I had a very informal 1-hour interview with him. So he was a real people's hero. And I can see how he lived so simply. There you are.
For Gemma, the first impression of the compound was the fish pond.
This is a very special place because, according to our guide, whenever a person would ask Ho Chi Minh what his personal properties are, he would point to the fish that he fed every day. So that has a very deep message. And we are really very touched whenever I think about Ho Chi Minh and Pham Van Dong.
Tell us a little bit about this trip to the memorial relic site related to President Ho Chi Minh. How was it?
Well, it was very exciting because I wanted to see if I could recognize the places or that house where I was able to interview Prime Minister Pham Van Dong. So when our guide said, well, this is it, this is the house that he would use. So like everything came back to me. And I suddenly remember, oh yes, this is it, this is the place. So of course I took a lot of pictures. And at that time we did not see, or I didn't see, the stilts house where President Ho Chi Minh lived. And it was explained to us that he chose that particular design because some ethnic tribes have that kind of house. And there was a place in the lower floor which was open. So because he wanted to always meet the children there, and he had a small aquarium on one side to entertain the children, and specially designed like a low wall where the children could sit down while they were talking to him. So I thought that was very thoughtful of him. And it was a very simple house. You wouldn't think that a president could live in a house like that.
President Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam is honored to have such a figure lead us because he's become such an inspirational figure, not only to Vietnamese people in the hearts of every Vietnamese, but across the world. He's become an international figure. Why is he loved so much? Do you know?
I think I know. I think it's because he put the interest of his country above everything else. And that's very difficult for many leaders in the world, right? Many leaders think only of the electoral campaigns, you know, how to prolong their stay in power. But then President Ho Chi Minh was so different, especially because it was wartime. And I think he could really project that genuine love for country to all the Vietnamese. That's why he were able to win the war.
What can you say, Antonio, about his ideological thinking, his thoughts, his writings? I mean, he was a very venerated man by Vietnam. He's still very venerated. What can you say about this man? I mean, whom you met really briefly, but who left a deep impression on you?
Well, he meant what he said. Even if you were a nationalist communist, because he was issuing that message to the youth, that meant you would really work for the people, for your own national interest, your own people, and that you would always be patriotic. That to me was the biggest impression. As I said, I was so impressed by him that, again I repeat, I am a Filipino, I'm not from, I felt like I could be, if necessary. I could feel I could die for a man like that. And that's very rare. So that is the impression I got. And so, in short, I tear once in a while when I think of that man.
May I add something? Well, he was not only a political leader, he was not only a thinker and philosopher. I think he also had a great moral ascendancy. He had moral authority, and his life was an example of his moral, simple man, integrity. His integrity was unassailable, and that's very important for a leader.
How about you had a chance in the second interview for Antonio, but it was your first interview with the then Prime Minister, Mr. Phạm Văn Đồng. How was he like, and what were some of the questions that you asked him then? How was the interview?
Yes. He was also an extremely simple man. As a matter of fact, he was standing at the foot of the steps of the house when we arrived. And I almost walked past him because I didn't realize that it was the Prime Minister who was standing there waiting for us to arrive. So I almost walked past him, but then I thought, oh, he looks familiar. Oh, that's Phạm Văn Đồng.
That comes to show how simple he is.
Yes, and I remember I asked him, what are you going to do with all the children who were hurt, who were harmed by all the bombs? Because that was really such a tremendous problem in Vietnam.
And what did he tell you?
Well, he said, yes, that is really something very tragic, and that they will just have to address it as the problem comes. But then, that's really a very difficult question to answer, because even today, there are so many children who are being hurt by bombs thrown
still living
all over
with the
place.
consequences
Yes.
of the war that ended
Exactly.
35 years ago.
Exactly.
What other question did you ask him? I understand that you asked him 2 questions.
Well, I did ask him a lot of questions. In fact, it's here in the end, the last chapter of the book, where I asked him. I think I also asked him. Oh, wait a minute.
You can also read from it if you'd like.
Here, the title of this chapter about Phạm Văn Đồng is The Laughter of Phạm Văn Đồng, because I thought that he was very humorous person, and despite the war conditions here, he still did not lose his happiness, his sense of humor, and he said that the reunification of our country must eventually come. That has been clearly stipulated in the Geneva Agreement, but we are not in a hurry to reunify, nor are we intending to coerce the South Vietnamese into reunifying. We entertain a high respect and love for them. They have been fighting for 25 years continuously. So that shows you, like his kindness towards other people and also his respect for their decisions.
When Gemma asked the Prime Minister, what will you do, how will you compensate, help all these children who have been at a young age maimed, destroyed by chemicals, toxins, etc., and still young, long lives to live, have not been able to be on their own yet. I noticed that this man, who I could see fierce, resistant, strong, brave, this was the only time I could feel a certain weakness in him.
Certain sadness.
We will try to do we don't know if there's any help you can do. We would appreciate that. This is the first time I could feel that if they really hit the children, there's very little you can do.
Very human.
They're not soldiers.
Yes, because here I wrote that about the children. My questions seem to have ripped him open to expose his tender heart.
Yes.
Because he was, really sort of at a loss at what to do. And he said that Vietnam would accept help from anyone who could help the children.
Now, I understand that later on, President Ho Chi Minh did send a message to Philippine youths. Do you happen to know what this message contained?
Well, as we were talking, I asked him, I was 27 years then, I'm now 72, and 73 next month. So I asked him, do you have a message to the Philippine youth? Because I was a member of a group called Young Nationalists. And he looked at me, you think it can be published? I said, I think so, I think we can publish it. And so he said, tell the youth of the Philippines that President Ho Chi Minh wants them to be communists. Because to be a communist is to be a nationalist and an internationalist at the same time.
Now, also in your comeback this time, Gemma was really happy to have a chance to meet one of her good friends that she has not seen in over 40 years. So let's have a look at this very emotional reunion.
The reunion becomes all the more emotional at the sight of an old group photograph. Former Minister of Labor, Invalids and Social Affairs Nguyễn Thị Hằng, back in the day, was the leader of a militia that protected bridges in Thanh Hóa, one of which was Ham Rong Bridge. Prior to this meeting, Hằng could not picture when or how she had met Gemma, but the photos seem to have brought back all memories.
So that is Minister Hằng when
vào tháng 5 năm 1968.
That's me.
Đấy là tôi này.
And then she had very long hair.
Và hồi đấy thì bà
Đúng là rất là bất ngờ. Chị đã đến đúng là cái khu vực mà chúng tôi chiến đấu. Chị đã đi thăm cầu, đi thăm bà con, đi thăm các cái đơn vị. Và chị đã viết sách 7, 6, 8 gì đó thì chị đến thăm. Lúc ấy thì là chiến tranh rất ác liệt. Mà chị đến tận nơi chiến trường và chị viết sách. Và bây giờ chị lại trở lại Việt Nam để tiếp tục gặp lại những cái người mà chị đã quen biết trước đây. Và chị cũng muốn là làm những cái phim tư liệu về Việt Nam, về Bác Hồ và về quan hệ của hai nước. Thì đấy là một cái bất ngờ rất là thú vị và rất là cảm động.
A meeting that began with a smile and ended with tears of joy for a friendship that has been timeless and boundless.
Tôi nghĩ là đấy là một cái con người mà họ có một cái tình yêu rất là đặc biệt với Việt Nam trước và sau này và bây giờ nữa. rất trân trọng và chúng tôi rất là cảm động. Tôi với bà ấy đều là không cầm được nước mắt. Lúc ấy thì mình mới nhớ lại là mình đã gặp chị ấy ở cái nơi gian khổ nhất và chị ấy vẫn nhớ về mình. Thì chị ấy làm bộ trưởng du lịch của Philippines và tôi thì làm bộ trưởng Bộ Lao động Thương binh Xã hội. Và bây giờ chúng tôi gần tuổi 70 lại gặp lại nhau. Đó là thật là.
Besides Hằng, have you gotten any kind of special friends, other friends here in Vietnam?
I met a group who were members of a Vietnamese women's association, and one of them was Bo Tite, and she would send me Christmas cards after we met, and I would also send her Christmas cards, but I don't know if my cards ever got to her. But for several years, we were sending greetings to each other. But unfortunately, I've never seen her again. So if she's listening tonight, here I am.
Her name is
Bo Tite.
Vo Tite. Yes.
I have a picture of her in my book,
Can you
together
show
with
us?
the other members of the Women's Association in Vietnam. We also had an afternoon tea with them, and they told us about what the women are doing here. Here, the Vietnamese Women's Association launched the 3 Responsibilities movement,
Yes.
which has enabled the women in the North to take part in the common struggle. So from left, Madame Le Huang, the Vice President, Madame Huan, and Bo Tite.
Now, Gemma, we know that you've lent a big hand to the Vietnamese embassy in the Philippines in the project to build President Ho Chi Minh's monument or statue in Manila's ASEAN Park.
Yes, that's true. Well, I work for the mayor of Manila, Mayor Alfredo Lim. And one of my duties as his executive assistant is to prepare the reception for ambassadors who want to call on the mayor of Manila. So when Ambassador Nguyen Vu Tu called on the mayor, I was there to arrange everything. And after that, we became friends. And one of the things he said was, or he asked, could we possibly put a bust of Ho Chi Minh here? I said, yes. I said, that's a splendid idea because a lot of young Filipinos do look up at President Ho Chi Minh, not only our generation. So I showed him various places, and I suggested the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Garden, which is in one of the historical parts of Manila. He was working on it on the Vietnamese side, and I was working it on the Philippine side. And we timed the unveiling for the state visit of your president. That was on October 26 to 28. Renata was there.
Exactly, I heard.
He was the first to arrive.
And the last to leave.
The last to leave.
Tell us about your feelings, Antonio, coming to this event. I understand that you also were able to touch this bus twice.
Yes, I wanted to really feel him again. Just touch, maybe I would feel his spirit. I can be as frank as I can. I felt very good.
If you had to talk about your feelings, if you had to describe your feelings and your love to Vietnam in one sentence, how would it be to the Vietnamese people, to the Vietnam land?
Well, I think it's a feeling of admiration and inspiration. The Vietnamese history, Vietnamese people will always be a source of inspiration for me.
How about for you, Antonio?
Well, the spirit is always there, fighting spirit. From a very disadvantageous position, it's in your history, against the Japanese, against the French, against the Mongols, against anybody who comes in, they don't last long.
You've kind of both nurtured a very strong love for the country since, you know, the beginning of coming here, even before that, hearing about the news and everything like that. Are you currently in the middle of writing something, or do you plan to write something more about Vietnam? Maybe catch up after, for you, Gemma, 40 years since the Hanoi Diary.
Yes, I think I'm going to reprint this book. It has been suggested to me by some people in the Philippines that I should reprint this book. And well, I told Tony that perhaps when I reprint this, I should include his articles, because he didn't compile his articles, so maybe we should just make one compilation. A lot of students are asking us now if this book is still available, because in that place where we put the bust of Ho Chi Minh, a place called Intramuros, the historic center, there are 5 universities in that place. And outside that place, there are even more universities and public schools. So, like, interest has been revived. So maybe I should really publish this.
We hope that you will, and maybe you'll have a chapter on your return visit
Yes,
this time.
of course.
How everything has changed. Is that right, Antonio?
That's right, especially when there will be a direct flight between Manila and Hanoi.
Wonderful. So hopefully you'll come back soon.
Let's hope
Hopefully, maybe I should even have it translated into Vietnamese.
That would be wonderful.
Because,
I think Vietnamese people would, you know, be so honored to read the writings of international friends such as yourself, and the love that you have had for Vietnam since our toughest days.
Besides, your generation should not forget what your fathers and mothers did for this country.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Gemma and Antonio, for coming and sharing your stories with us. And we hope you have the best of luck in your future endeavors, and that we'll be able to welcome you again to Vietnam.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. And that is it for this edition of Talk Vietnam with Gemma and Antonio. And we hope that you enjoyed this talk as much as I have. And we'll see you next time here on Talk Vietnam. Goodbye.